We're standing in the galleries of the Museum of the City of New York in an exhibition called Making Room. And the exhibition shows how architecture and interior design can accommodate big changes that are happening not only in New York City today, but will be happening here in the future and are happening in cities all over the world.
So the real origin of the Making Room project was back in 2007. And our organization, CHPC, saw that the mayor had projected an extra 1 million people coming to New York City. So for us as housing researchers, the big question was, how are we going to accommodate 1 million people, and how are they going to fit into the housing stock? So we really tried to look at, well, how are people fitting into a housing stock today? We know that there's so many restrictions on where you can build in New York. There's a lot of restrictions on how tall you can go. And we started to look at census data and try and work out how households are arranged. When we stepped away from this idea that a household is a family and really looked at how people were living, we saw these two major stories. One is 1/3 of all of New York City, of the households, is a single person living by themselves, which obviously has big repercussions for what type of housing is needed. Then on the other side, there's all these people sharing in some way to try and fit in. 1/4 of all households, there's some sort of additional adult or additional couple embedded in a household, trying to fit themselves into the city by doubling up. So these major stories suggested to us that we need way more housing options to accommodate these non-traditional and more diverse dynamic households. We needed smaller options for single people, and we needed larger, more flexible options for people to share.
The museum had done an exhibition some years ago based on the mayor's Plan NYC, which is where many of these statistics come from, and that looked at issues of sustainability in New York City's future. So when Citizens Housing approached us and asked if we wanted to work with them on this exhibition, we saw it as an opportunity to continue that tradition of working on such shows that focus on New York City's future and that take on these larger sort of municipal issues. One of the challenges of organizing such an exhibition and presenting data and statistics of this nature to people is how to make it engaging. So the designers that we worked with, a firm here in New York called Pure and Applied, came up with, I think, a very clever way to talk about the two big statistics that the show explores. One is the changing demographics of New York City, which they dimensionalize in a sense with a series of boxes. So this, for instance, the deepest box indicates that 33%, the largest percentage of any of the people in the city, 33% of households are single people living alone. Whereas this three-dimensional graph depicts the change in population in the city. So you'll see in 1800, New York City had 60,000 people. In 2011, it was about 8.2 million. And this is indicating that by 2030, it's predicted there will be about 600,000 more New Yorkers, and the population will be about 8.8 million people. If these statistics are put into effect, and the housing policy has to change to accommodate these changes, then there are certain regulations that would need to change. And those are featured over here.
So we at CHPC, we began to look at why do we keep reproducing the same 1, 2, and 3 bedroom apartments when the majority of our households are living in different ways. And we did a full review of all of the housing laws and codes in New York, and we saw all of the different ways in which these policies are really holding New York City's housing back in the 1950s and in the decades where the laws and codes came about. So, for example, it's still not permitted for more than 3 people who are not related to each other to live together in a unit. We have minimum unit sizes which stop studios being built. We have a lot of strict density controls which stop studios being built. So in the exhibition, we really took all of those laws and codes and combined them all to create 7 themes that are really holding New York City's housing back. And the exhibition designer created cartoons to represent those themes.
And as you walk through the exhibition, these regulations are shown, these cartoons are repeated at each of the projects, indicating which of the regulations would need to be modified to make the design you're looking at possible.
So in this way, it's really the educational component so that people can understand the impact of policies on their actual choices in the real housing market, and also on the choices of developers and architects when they're designing new buildings. So in the exhibition, we also touch on what happens if we don't respond to demographic change in the housing market. What we looked at is this big mismatch that occurs between how people are really living and what their legal, safe options are. And this mismatch is particularly difficult for single adults, and that's a big theme that runs through the exhibition. So in the exhibit, we look at, well, what happens if that mismatch persists? And the reality is that people have to go in the underground, informal, shared housing market in order to try and fit in to the housing stock that's available. In fact, only 1.5% of the housing in New York would be ready for occupancy and suitable for them. So people are really forced to live in illegal, insecure, very informal arrangements, mostly creating households based on the internet and going on Craigslist.
Yeah, this was actually a sampling of a Craigslist from about a week before the show opened, and we simply typed in shared housing, and this is what we found. There's maybe 100 entries that automatically popped up. Many are actually illegal and many are unsafe actually. Because what happens is if you're renting a room in a large house, that room probably doesn't have a lock on the door, but you might choose to put a lock on the door because now it's your own apartment. And that's an unsafe situation because then you don't have a legal means of exit if case there's a fire. And if there is a fire and the fire department appears, they don't know that there's going to be a lock on that door because there shouldn't be that kind of a lock on a domestic door. So it causes a ripple effect of all kinds of comfort problems, but also safety problems, especially fire safety.
So the whole point of the Making Room initiative is to come up with safe legal alternatives to this that really look at the reality of how people are living and allow the physical stock to respond to that, instead of trying to have an ideal for design that doesn't necessarily correspond with the reality of how people are living. So the entrance part of the main bulk of the exhibition are models that are results of a design challenge that we set back in 2011. So CHPC, in partnership with the Architectural League of New York, wanted to get teams of architects to take the real demographic data, how households are really living, and design some new housing units within existing New York buildings that would actually support their needs better. So that we asked them, don't worry about the laws and codes. We want to keep basic fire safety, that's the core goal. But don't worry about any of the occupancy rules or the density controls. Really just design the inside of a building so that it would support these real households, and we gave them all the demographic data that we had done, and also gave them some best practice examples from other cities of architects who had been thinking about these things. And at that time, the teams of architects, they came up with 12 to 15 different ideas for housing units, which look at small units for people who are single and look at shared housing for single adults to be able to live together. And then also arrangements for families to be able to live with extended family members and to adjust their single family home with accessory dwelling units. For the exhibition, the museum selected 5 of those designs to be built as actual models.
And the architects created the models specifically with us, and we worked very closely with them to provide graphics which could provide the kind of context to the models that we thought was necessary.
So the models that you see here are a whole range of micro apartments and also shared housing. So one of the models is by an architectural team that was led by Jonathan Kirschenfeld. And it's this part of the exhibition over here. And so he's really experienced in designing and building supportive housing in New York. With supportive housing, you can build very small studios for single adults. So he really took that idea of supportive housing and designed some housing units that would be for the private market, but along the same principles. And he really contextualized his ideas and took 3 buildings that actually exist on the Grand Concourse and then reconfigured the insides for single adults and a whole combination of different units. So he looked at very small studios for singles. He looked at kind of a new thinking of the old single room occupancy units where somebody would just live in a very small space with a bed and then maybe share a bathroom and a kitchen, and really taking the idea of what is the basic amount of space that would be the most affordable for a single person. and really playing with those ideas of some private space and then maybe some space that can be shared. He also, in his buildings, put in very, very large units, 7, 8 bedroom units that extended families could use, and they could rent out certain rooms if they didn't need them. The unit could actually evolve as the household changed and shrunk and grew in different ways.
One of the 3 schemes that Jonathan Kirschenfeld and his team did is this example. This design shows 3 kinds of living in one apartment component. There's a totally private layer, which is a series of small bedrooms that each person has. The next layer is semi-private, so a person has their own workspace, but they share a bathroom. And the third layer is a communal space for cooking and working and eating. So it has 3 layers, the totally private, the semi-private, and the communal.
One of the teams was led by an architect that lives in San Diego, Ted Smith, and he builds a lot of shared housing actually for young architects in San Diego. So he for the exhibition, took a New York City townhouse and reconfigured the inside as shared suites for single adults. So one of the architectural teams was led by Rafi Siegel and Stan Allen, and they had a different take on it. They looked at an old 1960s office building, and they envisaged this idea of kind of urban cabins for single adults to rent, where they could also rent workspace in the building too. So it was a live-work hybrid. You could accommodate a lot of single people, but you're also making room in existing stock in a different way.
What it is to the average floor-to-ceiling height in an office building is higher than in a residential building because of the mechanical system. So actually in 2 floors of office, you can get 3 floors of residential, which is what they're doing in this design. That's how they're fitting so many residential units in. They're increasing the 2 floors of office to 3 floors of residential.
And these are the models here. This is how the building actually relates in the streetscape, and then this is a more detailed external look at the building. And then we have a whole array of different site plans that look at the interior of how the commercial building can be turned into these different floors of residential.
This is the office tower. It's a large black glass block that's in Midtown Manhattan. And what they've done with the design is they've carved into the block of the building various landscaped atrium spaces that could be used by the public who's living in the building. So this model represents the work of an architect named Deborah Gans. She took the challenge of modifying a single-family home, the standard bungalow in Queens. And what she did was, by adding various elements, such as you can see here represented in copper colors, she was able to convert the single-family home into a building of 8 smaller legal units, including a kind of grandmother flat that's attached to the garage area. And in the model, you see the additions, but then in the graphic, in pink, you see the various legal small apartments, each with their own means of egress that she's created. She was also careful to understand that many people like the looks, the kind of picturesque sloped roofs of these kinds of neighborhoods, and therefore, instead of adding a big white glass box to the building, she actually created a series of small gable structures. So on the streetscape, even though there are many more units, the overall silhouette of the block is retained.
And this is really perfect for an extended family who goes through different life cycles. The mother-in-law comes and moves in, and there's some flexibility for her to have some private space, maybe have dinner with the family, but also gives the family some flexibility to rent out certain parts to supplement their mortgage. You know, it really reflects the reality of more of the flexibility and fluidity of households.
And this would be a good example of what is in many ways illegally done by people who are going on Craigslist and renting a bedroom. This would create a legal, more comfortable situation in response to what's already being done in New York now illegally.
This model shows the idea of architect Peter Gluck along with Terry Chow. They looked at taking a typical New York City brownstone on the grid and reconfigure the inside. They could ignore the current density controls that we have, and also minimum unit size. And if you ignore density and minimum unit size, instead of 15 units, which you could fit in a brownstone, they were able to fit in 21 units. So you can see immediately how you can increase the number of units and create suitable spaces for single adults. And their idea was to really shrink the size of a unit. These are only 225 square foot. But take advantage of very tall ceilings so that the light and air is still maximized, and really create mezzanine spaces so that people can sleep and have furniture below. So all of the space is fully utilized.
The average New York City building is 25 feet wide, and the restriction is you have to have 30 feet outside of your window. So understandably, for that reason, there's no way to have side windows to these units. If, however, you change that regulation, which is what this is proposing to do, you would have a 20-foot wide building with a 5-foot wide yard. The downside of that is that even though the windows would be large, and you can see them there, the distance from your window, which would be here, would be the size of the space to that wall. So while you're gaining in the number of units in the building, you're losing a lot when it comes to the light issue. And there's a question with these kinds of projects. There's an upside and there's also a downside, and it's balancing those two that the show asks people to do as they come through the exhibition.
So based on our original Making Room initiative, Mayor Bloomberg and City Hall were actually inspired by these ideas and really wanted to test one of them in the marketplace. So they decided to put forward a pilot that looked at, if we allowed some areas of zoning to be reformed and relaxed a little bit, what could architects and developers come up with that would actually provide safe legal housing for single adults, in particular designing micro units. So the pilot is on a piece of city-owned land on East 27th Street, and the mayor will be overriding our zoning controls, particularly about the minimum size of a studio, and also the density controls. How many units you're allowed to fit in a building will be waived. So they really wanted to use this pilot to test the idea of what could really happen if we allow some areas of zoning to change. How could developers and architects come up with some new ideas to provide safe legal housing for single adults?
And for the Museum of the City of New York, this was a great opportunity to show that while much of the exhibition talks about projects that are theoretical and conceptual, we could actually show that some of the ideas are going into the marketplace in New York City and are actually starting to happen. And that was a way that we could show the actual result of some of the ideas that the show presents.
So in the exhibition, we have images from the winning design. This would be the interior of a basic unit. And the idea is they're between 250 and 350 square foot. The idea is the entrance part would be the kind of function of the unit, the bathroom, the kitchen, storage, and then the whole front part of the unit would be a flexible living space, so living room and bedroom. And this is how the exterior would look. The design is actually going to be modular construction and built on the Brooklyn Navy Yard and shipped over to the site. So for the exhibition, we really wanted to get people to understand what small spaces can actually feel like. And the models go some way in doing that, but we really felt like we needed people to have more of a clear understanding and to be able to interact with what that space would really be like. So for the exhibition itself, we designed a micro apartment. It's 325 square foot, called it the launch pad, and visitors could go through and really understand how the space would feel and how great design and great interiors can maximize a small space.
When you first walk into the micro unit, you enter the kitchen, which is deceptively small. It feels a lot larger than it actually is. The floor plan is actually only 7 feet by 7 feet, but we were able to trick the eye by putting all of the appliances under the counter. There's an under-counter refrigerator and a separate under-counter freezer, which actually together gives you the cubic volume of a traditional 24-inch wide refrigerator, but you don't sacrifice any of the counter space. There's even a dishwasher under the sink. And just like in the rest of the apartment, wall space was maximized completely. There are hooks and storage along the entire backsplash. There's nothing unusual about this kitchen except that it takes advantage of every vertical square foot as well as every horizontal square foot. There's an induction cooktop, which also maximizes counter space since it doesn't get hot, and a convection and microwave combination oven. The highlight of the kitchen is actually this dining table, which is stored underneath the counter and rolls out and can be used as additional workspace or seating for two, or with a flip of the top, seating for four. There's a lot of seating in this space, including real chairs that are stored on the wall in the entry. And the chairs store in about 4 inches of space. So they're there when you need them, and they go away completely when you don't. When we enter the main living space of the micro apartment, this was really designed to perform multiple functions, and to perform multiple functions, but one at a time. So right now, this living area is about 182 square feet, the main part of it, not including the kitchen and the bathroom. And right now it's 182 square foot living room, because that's what we're using it for right now. But when we were designing this apartment and had this theoretical client in mind, and she was a young school teacher, we knew that she would need certain things. Because she was a school teacher, she would want a workspace, she would need storage for her books, she'd need storage for clothes, and she also would want to entertain her friends. So behind this TV module, we hid a bar, which we thought was very important for her. And when she was entertaining her friends, this coffee table actually converts into seating for 4 people just by taking off the top. Each one of the insides comes out, and each one of the tops comes off and forms seating, and it can still be a coffee table. So we've actually had dinner parties in here where we've had 8 people for dinner, and it's been really comfortable and really fun. The storage part of it, there's a lot of areas for books, because if she is a teacher, then she clearly needs books. We actually even put some file cabinets in here just because paper is not going to go away completely. And she has a little private space over here that's a little desk for her. But it folds up, it goes away when she's not working, grading papers or on her laptop. So in this apartment, everything does double duty, including the desk chair. So when it's not a desk chair, it's actually a step ladder that was designed to let you access easily all of the storage on this wall. And on this wall, there is actually 133 cubic feet of storage going almost 9 feet high. We were able to take advantage of all the vertical height in the space, just like in the kitchen, because when you have a small footprint, you also can't forget about wall vertical space. So on this huge storage wall is obviously clothing storage. And just like the upper storage, we took advantage of the vertical space by putting a hanging bar all the way up to the top of this almost 9-foot high closet. And with the aid of a pull-down bar, you can really access everything that's inside this closet all the way up to the top. It wouldn't normally be accessible otherwise. There's also built-in drawers and a built-in ironing board. And anytime you can build something in, it reduces clutter, and that's key in a small space like this. So now we're going to change our 182 square foot living room into a 182 square foot bedroom. The storage continues underneath this 7-foot sofa where all the bedding can be stored. And this 7-foot sofa is actually part of a system that includes a real bed, a real wall bed. This is not a sofa bed. So it is designed to be slept on every day. So this bed can be left made, and all you do is pull this handle. The shelf becomes the foot of the bed. Nothing has to be removed from the shelf. So it's a pretty seamless operation. You can leave your bedding on the bed and you're ready to go. And now we have a 182 square foot bedroom. There's also LED lighting throughout the whole apartment. So it's very energy efficient and very sustainable. And in the morning, it's a flick of the wrist and you're back to your living room.
So for our Making Room initiative, we had actually at the very beginning of the project looked at other cities around the world to see what architects we're really doing to respond to demographic change, especially the rise of single adults and these non-traditional shared households. And so the whole back part of the exhibition here are examples from around the world that are actually built, that are responding to this real demographic change. The section in particular focuses on Japan, which is a huge leader in terms of compact space, especially for single adults. This section here, we've took actual built examples from other cities in North America that are thinking about demographic change and single adults and how you can adapt housing to respond to this. So we have a variety of examples from San Francisco, Providence, from Vancouver. We have one here from Seattle where they permit small cottages or small backyard units to be built. So you can have your mother-in-law live there or you could rent it out. They permit this to happen in a way that New York doesn't allow.
Oftentimes these are cities in which there's a young creative class that the city wants to keep because these are people who pay rent, buy clothes, shop, eat out, and they want to keep these young people in the city and they want to find a way to accommodate them. So there are oftentimes cities that have universities in them, like Providence or Boston or San Francisco, or there are cities that have high-tech or finance industries. And so these are the kinds of cities that are actually looking to find these solutions.